Denise Amber Lee had always been a force of light in the lives of those around her. A devoted mother, loyal friend, and warm-hearted woman in her late 20s, Denise's laughter was infectious, and her presence could lift even the heaviest of moods. Her life in Port Charlotte, Florida was quiet but full, filled with school runs, grocery trips, evening chats with neighbors, and the occasional night out with friends. On January 16, 2008, Denise went about her usual routines, unaware that her life was about to take a dark, irreversible turn. That evening, Denise made a quick stop at a nearby grocery store. She chatted briefly with the cashier, paid for her items, and returned to her car, humming along to the radio. Surveillance cameras captured her leaving the store, yet nobody could have predicted the chain of events that would follow. Just minutes after she got into her vehicle, she became prey to a predator lurking in the shadows, Michael King, a man whose criminal record included violence, manipulation, and a disturbing history that would later shock the nation. As Denise drove home, she received a call on her cell phone. The screen displayed a familiar name, but she ignored it. Michael King was already watching, his mind twisted with sinister intent. He followed her, waiting for the perfect moment to strike. Then, without warning, he intercepted her route, forcing her into a nightmare from which there would be no escape. Meanwhile, her absence was quickly noticed. Denise had a routine, and her family knew it well. When she didn't return home, panic set in. Her husband tried calling her cell repeatedly, each ring unanswered. Anxiety turned into fear as the hours passed. Friends and family began calling local authorities, desperate for answers. This was the night that would test the limits of the community's emergency response system, as well as the courage and intuition of those tasked with saving lives. The first responders arrived quickly, but information was scarce. Where had Denise gone? Who could have taken her? The investigation began like a puzzle with missing pieces. Every street camera, witness account, and fragment of evidence became a vital clue. As the sun set over Port Charlotte, the weight of uncertainty pressed down on the city. Denise's family clung to hope, while police officers worked tirelessly, piecing together the events of a single, devastating evening. Amid detention, one figure emerged as an unexpected hero, 911 operator Annie Alexander. Trained to recognize danger hidden in everyday calls, Annie would soon become the pivotal force in tracking Denise's abductor. But even her skills and instincts faced challenges. Michael King had forced Denise to make a frantic call, and he spoke over her, manipulating the situation to his advantage. The line crackled with urgency and terror, the stakes higher than anyone could fully comprehend. By the end of the night, Denise Amber Lee was missing, and the community was gripped by fear and sorrow. Part 1 closes with the haunting image of her abandoned car and the unanswered questions that loomed. Who had taken her? Could she be found alive? And most importantly, how could a single act of violence unravel an entire town and later change the way emergency systems operate across a state? The story of Denise Amber Lee was about to unfold, not just as a tale of tragedy, but as a gripping account of heroism, investigation, and the devastating consequences of one person's violent choices. The audience is left on edge, desperate to follow the next part of the story, the crime itself, the chilling details of her abduction, and the frantic efforts to save her before it was too late. The night was quiet in Port Charlotte, Florida. The kind of stillness that blankets a town in false security. Denise Amber Lee's life had been stolen in the blink of an eye, yet no one knew exactly what had happened. Michael King, a man whose history was littered with violence and manipulation, had intercepted her as she drove home from the grocery store. His mind was methodical, cruel, and calculated. In his twisted logic, Denise was just another victim to control, a life to erase. Denise struggled as King forced her into his car, her heart pounding, her mind racing for a way out. The streets she knew so well became a maze of fear and uncertainty. She called out, pleaded, tried to grab his attention, but King was unyielding. For the first time, she realized how fragile safety could be. Every second mattered, yet every second felt like an eternity. Meanwhile, on the other side of the city, Denise's family was frantically trying to reach her. Her phone went unanswered, and each moment of silence intensified their panic. They contacted police, describing her last known location, the car she drove, and her appearance. Officers mobilized quickly, coordinating search efforts that would stretch through the night. The pressure was immense: a missing woman, a ticking clock, and the terrifying unknown. Within the emergency call center, 911 operator Annie Alexander's phone rang. The voice on the line was anxious, fractured, trapped beneath the control of a man who threatened to end a life at any moment. Denise's call was brief, broken by King's interruptions, yet Annie sensed the urgency hidden beneath the static. She had been trained to detect danger in situations like this, but what unfolded on that line was nothing short of harrowing. Denise's composure masked her terror as she whispered what she could. Every word counted. Annie stayed calm, guiding her, listening to the sounds of the struggle, the subtle cues of a life hanging by a thread. It was a battle of wits and courage, a mother fighting for survival, an operator fighting to save her, and a predator unaware that his control was being challenged. As the call ended, Annie acted quickly. She traced the call, coordinated with local law enforcement, and analyzed the fragmented information Denise had provided. Each piece of data, a street name, a vehicle description, the faint sound of movement, became a vital clue. Meanwhile, King drove with grim determination, oblivious that his actions were being tracked, that the invisible net of law enforcement was slowly tightening around him. Law enforcement officers fanned out across Port Charlotte. Neighborhoods were canvassed, homes knocked on, and cars checked. Police used every tool at their disposal, traffic cameras, cell phone records, witness statements, to track Denise's path. As the hours passed, the city held its collective breath. The narrative of the night became a tense interplay of pursuit and evasion, of hope and dread. But the investigation soon uncovered horrifying evidence of King's intent. Denise's abduction was not a random act, it was premeditated. King had selected his victim with a chilling precision. As detectives pieced together his history, a pattern emerged. A man capable of deception, manipulation, and violence, now caught in the act of committing the ultimate crime. His prior offenses were suddenly context for this moment, explaining the depth of his danger, but not the terror Denise had endured. By the early morning hours, the search shifted from hope to grim determination. Signs of Denise's struggle were discovered, each clue a confirmation of her worst fears. The public followed the story closely, media coverage amplifying both fear and outrage. Families across the city were gripped by the possibility that such a tragedy could happen anywhere, at any time. The call that had set everything into motion was the key to unraveling King's actions. Annie Alexander, working with law enforcement, analyzed it repeatedly. Her instincts, training, and quick decisions provided the first glimmer of hope in an otherwise dark situation. Each replay revealed new details: a landmark, a turn in the road, the sound of King's voice. Every observation brought investigators closer to a timeline, a location, and eventually justice. But the story was far from over. Denise's fate, while still unknown, hung in the balance. Law enforcement faced the grim reality that, despite their best efforts, every moment lost could cost a life. The narrative shifted between the calculated evil of King and the tireless, desperate efforts of the people determined to stop him. Suspense mounted as the audience follows both sides of the pursuit, the predator unaware of how closely he is being monitored, and the community desperately clinging to hope. By dawn, the investigation had reached a turning point. The 911 call, analyzed by Annie and her colleagues, provided law enforcement with a probable location. Police officers, armed with both courage and resolve, prepared to confront the man who had shattered the lives of so many. The tension was palpable, the city holding its breath as the clock ticked toward a confrontation that would ultimately reveal the horrifying truth. Part 2 concludes with the chilling realization of the stakes. A woman's life was at risk, a predator remained free, and the community's worst fears were confirmed. The audience is left on edge, desperate to follow the next chapter, the trial, the public outrage, and the battle for justice that would not only punish a criminal, but also challenge systemic flaws in law enforcement and emergency response systems. The arrest of Michael King sent shockwaves through Port Charlotte. He had been caught, but the relief of law enforcement and Denise Amberly's family was tempered by the enormity of what had occurred. King was charged with kidnapping and murder, and the details of his crime quickly became a public nightmare, splashed across headlines and news broadcasts nationwide. For the community, this was not just a criminal case, it was a reckoning. In the weeks leading up to the trial, the courtroom became a stage for grief, outrage, and moral confrontation. Denise's family, still reeling from her loss, prepared to face the man responsible for tearing their lives apart. Every member of the family carried the weight of their sorrow, each testimony a heartbeat of pain and love for Denise. Her mother spoke of her laughter, her courage, and the way she brightened every room she entered. Her husband recounted their shared dreams and the hollow silence left in her absence. Their words painted a portrait of a life stolen far too soon. The prosecution built a meticulous case, highlighting not only King's actions that night, but also his history of violence and manipulation. The 911 call, recorded and presented in court, became a pivotal piece of evidence. The operator's bravery, especially Annie Alexander's quick thinking, was brought to the forefront, showing how a life might have been saved with just a few more minutes or different circumstances. The courtroom listened to Denise's whispered pleas, overlaid with King's controlling interruptions, a chilling reminder of the horror she endured. King's defense attempted to challenge the narrative, casting doubt on his intentions and his awareness of the severity of his actions. But the evidence was overwhelming. DNA, witness testimony, phone records, and the timeline of his abduction left little room for argument. Every detail, meticulously gathered by law enforcement, told the story of a calculated predator and a courageous, trapped victim. The courtroom became a battle of truth versus deceit, fact versus manipulation, justice versus denial. Outside the courtroom, public outrage grew. Citizens were horrified not only by the brutality of Denise's murder, but also by the systemic flaws that allowed her abduction to escalate. The 911 system, though staffed by dedicated operators, had limitations that the crime exposed. Advocates and community members demanded reforms, shining a light on the policies and procedures that had failed to protect a young mother in her most vulnerable moments. Local media covered every angle, from law enforcement interviews to family statements, ensuring that the story remained at the forefront of public consciousness. The trial became a national symbol of accountability and reform. Legal experts dissected the case, debating not only King's guilt, but also the implications for emergency response systems across the country. The courtroom drama was punctuated by emotional testimony, law enforcement officers recounting the night's chaotic search, 911 operators describing the challenges of distinguishing truth from manipulation, and community members reflecting on the fragility of safety in everyday life. Each moment reinforced the story's human dimension, making it impossible for the audience to view the events as abstract or distant. King's demeanor during the trial was chillingly detached. His lack of remorse contrasted starkly with the anguish of Denise's family. He tried to manipulate the narrative in court, but the weight of evidence and the collective scrutiny of the public and legal system left him cornered. Each revelation, each piece of damning testimony, further eroded his credibility, exposing the depth of his deception and cruelty. After weeks of testimony, deliberation, and emotional testimony, the jury reached a verdict. Michael King was found guilty of murder and kidnapping, and he received the maximum sentence, death. The courtroom erupted in a mixture of relief, sorrow, and lingering anger. For Denise's family, justice was bittersweet, an acknowledgement of the wrong done, yet incapable of filling the void left by her absence. The aftermath of the trial ignited a wave of legislative action. The public, inspired by the heroism of 911 operators and motivated by the tragedy, pushed for change. Florida lawmakers responded with the Denise Amberly Act, a series of reforms designed to improve emergency response protocols, enhance operator training, and streamline 911 communications. Denise's story became a catalyst, showing how a single, horrific crime could illuminate systemic weaknesses and inspire real change. In the community, memorials and vigils honored Denise's memory. Citizens, activists, and local leaders joined in commemorations, not only mourning her loss, but also recognizing the lessons learned. Her family became advocates, speaking publicly about the importance of reform and the bravery of those who tried to save her. The narrative shifted from tragedy to purpose, emphasizing that Denise's death, while devastating, had created a legacy capable of preventing future loss.
Part 3 concludes with a complex mixture of emotions: the satisfaction of justice served, the sorrow of lives irreparably changed, and the recognition that one person's tragedy could catalyze widespread reform. The audience is left grappling with both the horror of the crime and the inspiring consequences of courage, advocacy, and legal accountability. The story sets the stage for the final part, which explores the lasting impact, the legal reforms that followed, and the enduring memory of Denise Amberly.
The murder of Denise Amberly left a void that could never be filled, yet her story did not end with tragedy. In the aftermath of the trial, as the community struggled to process the horror of her death and the chilling details of Michael King's crimes, a new narrative began to take shape, a story of reform, resilience, and a legacy that would save lives. Denise's family, still grieving, emerged as powerful advocates. The pain of loss had transformed into a determination to ensure that no one else would endure what they had suffered. They worked tirelessly with lawmakers, law enforcement officials, and community activists to examine the failures that had occurred that fateful night. The gaps in the 911 system were glaring. Operators were often undertrained, protocols inconsistent, and critical information sometimes lost in the chaos of emergency calls. The 911 calls that had captured Denise's abduction became a case study in both heroism and failure. Annie Alexander's extraordinary presence of mind, patience, and skill had highlighted the potential for life-saving intervention, but also the limitations of a system that could have been even more effective. These recordings were used in hearings, workshops, and public forums, showing policymakers the urgent need for change. Lawmakers responded. The Denise Amberly Act was drafted and passed, mandating comprehensive reforms to Florida's emergency response protocols. The legislation required extensive 911 operator training, standardization of procedures, and implementation of advanced technologies to better trace calls, identify emergencies, and respond efficiently. It also emphasized community awareness campaigns, encouraging citizens to understand how to interact with emergency services and recognize signs of danger. Beyond the legislation, Denise's story became an educational tool. Law enforcement agencies across the state, and eventually nationwide, adopted training programs based on her case. Operators were trained to recognize subtle clues in calls, to trust instincts while following protocol, and to work collaboratively with field officers in real time. Workshops often began with a moment of silence for Denise, reminding trainees that the decisions they made could literally be the difference between life and death. In Port Charlotte, memorials and tributes honored her memory. Parks, scholarships, and community events were dedicated to Denise Amberly, celebrating not just her life, but her enduring impact on public safety. Friends and neighbors recounted her warmth, her dedication to her children, and the way she had brought joy to those around her. Through these acts, the community transformed grief into remembrance, mourning into motivation. The story of Denise's murder also sparked a national conversation about public safety, accountability, and systemic reform. Media outlets, documentaries, and news specials highlighted the case, focusing not only on the crime, but also on the heroism of 911 operators and the systemic changes that followed. Her narrative became a symbol of the importance of vigilance, preparedness, and proactive governance. Families, emergency responders, and lawmakers drew lessons from the tragedy, striving to prevent similar incidents in their own communities. For Denise's family, the journey was never easy. Each anniversary, each news article, each recounting of her story reopened old wounds. Yet they remained committed to transforming grief into action. They founded advocacy groups, spoke at conferences, and shared Denise's story with lawmakers and the public. Their voices ensured that the conversation never faded, that Denise's life, though cut short, continued to have a tangible impact. Even years later, the legacy of Denise Amberly continues. Emergency systems are faster, more responsive, and more reliable. Operators are better trained, communities are more aware, and countless lives have been saved thanks to the reforms inspired by her tragedy. Her story serves as a somber reminder of the fragility of safety, but also an enduring testament to courage, advocacy, and the power of one life to catalyze systemic change. In the final scenes of her story are quiet but profound. Families gather at memorials, law enforcement officers recount the lessons learned, and citizens reflect on the enduring significance of her life. Denise's memory lives on in legislation, training programs, and the countless individuals who are now better equipped to respond to emergencies. Though her life was stolen, her impact continues to echo across communities, reminding everyone that even in the darkest moments, courage, dedication, and action can create lasting change. In the end, the story of Denise Amberly is more than a tale of tragedy. It is a narrative of transformation. It is about a mother whose life and death inspired a state to rethink how it protects its citizens. It is about ordinary people rising to extraordinary challenges. And it is about a community and a nation learning that from heartbreak can emerge vigilance, reform, and hope. Denise's legacy is a living one, etched into law, education, and the hearts of those who remember her.
Her name is no longer just associated with a horrific crime. It is a symbol of resilience, courage, and the enduring power of change. And while the memory of her loss will never fade, it has forged a path toward a safer, more prepared future for all.